to do specific things, and it's often too supply driven. There isn't enough demand. You bring people, yes, I'll come, I'll train. You train them, they go back and they're putting out fires. The people, when training is done, it has to be targeted to things that people see as useful for the tasks that they have to do. And I think that there's not enough attention given to this. And this brings me to the last and in some ways the most important point about my concerns about the fiscal federalism model is that it's all focused on design. It's all focused on design. It says not a word about implementation. Yet if you look at the fiscal federalism model, it gives us this beautiful model of an intergovernmental fiscal system that ought to be able to finance services well and so forth. But the problem is that the reality is here, and the theory tells us we need to be here. How do you get from here to here? You need a strategy for implementation. And there are different ways of thinking about implementation strategies. One is a we talked about this morning, very paternalistic thing. You can't do everything at once, but the central government or the state government will decide when local bodies can assume new functions or start collecting new revenues. This doesn't really work. Another, which is implied, I think, in the fiscal federalism literature, because it comes from economists, is what I sometimes call the sink or swim model. You set up the framework, you pass the laws, and it creates the right incentives, and everybody's going to behave just like they're supposed to because you've set up the system with the right incentives. No, the world doesn't work that way. You need something between this, let's set the framework and hope for the best, and let's micromanage every new function and task that local bodies take on. And so you need a strategy. You need a starting point. Urban local bodies are different. Should they all be treated in the same way? Should they initially have all the same functions and resources? Or should they have to earn the right to get certain powers by the way that they behave? And tying the strategy into, tying capacity building into the elements of a strategy. To me, the biggest, the most common scenarios with fiscal decentralization in the countries that I've worked in are either that you pass a beautiful law and because of all the political and institutional reasons we talked about before, it doesn't get implemented, it stalls. Or you immediately implement things that require too many changes in the system to happen too quickly, too many people to change their behavior. They threaten the tolerance of the higher levels that are losing power and overwhelm the capacity of the lower levels that are gaining power, and you have failure. And what happens when you have failure? Some of my most recent writing has been about re-centralization in developing countries, because places that have pursued these by-the-book, beautiful, theory-inspired, supposedly context-tailored ways of doing reform are pulling back powers because their reforms haven't worked. So I think that one last point, and I realize I've got about a minute left, there's also the notion of strategy at the local level. Even if an urban local body or a local government anywhere is empowered, you can't do everything quickly. Say you adopt tax increment financing. This is going to have major financial implications for the people who are affected by it. Or you adopt property tax reform. You can't simply go from collecting nothing to collecting huge amounts of money, especially if people aren't getting services. So part of the strategy from a local government perspective is about negotiating with their constituents, with an association of manufacturers. Yes, we'll fix the road to the industrial area, but we need to get a loan to do that, and to pay the loan, we need to raise property rates, or we need to have another source of revenue. Market user association members, the market's dirty, there's no water, we need this, we need that. Okay, well, we can do that, the local government says, but we need to raise the market fees. We need to be able to have the resources to be able to do this and keep it sustainable. So it gets back to this notion of the social contract, that if you want to raise local revenues, the people who pay them have to feel like they're getting something out of this bargain. So I think maybe I tried to cover a little bit too much, and I didn't actually get to give some of the examples that I was going to give, and I apologize about that. But just to sum up the points that I want to leave you with, I think that the chapters in this volume are a great start, both for how to think about linking the financing mechanisms that need to be in place to planning issues and to spatial issues, because I neglected to mention that fiscal federalism operates in economic space, not in physical or geographic space, which is another huge weakness. But this question of how to not only how to link to the larger planning issues, but also to link to the beneficiaries of these planning issues, which is the session that we'll turn to next. And so these fiscal federalism matters that help us think about how to better finance urban services need both upstream and downstream linkages to other aspects of the system. But there are still all these other factors, the political economy factors that are important in developing in implementing, and the strategies for implementing, because the things that need to be done, as we heard this morning, are so many and so complicated. And how do you identify things that are doable, that are strategic, that begin to push the system a bit in the right direction? And that gives you a foundation for change that doesn't exist if everybody's doing their own thing on different parts of the system and in their different silos. So thank you, and I look forward to discussing and maybe giving you some concrete examples.
For giving me this opportunity. I wasn't exactly aware that you would want me to speak here, but thank you very much anyway. I think as Dr. Paul spoke, some of the papers that are in discussion, especially the one on PPP, is a great start. It lays out the overall scene, tells us the importance of PPP, also tells us that we haven't done much of it, then gives us a very good introduction. But what next? Are we in a position to, have we first of all really accepted the role of PPP in urban development and provision of urban services? That's not clear to me yet. If you take a look at the JNURM papers, policy papers, the omnipresent lip service to PPPs is present there as well. But I'm not aware of how it has been operationalized in the last several years. I'm not aware of any assistance under JNURM which has been used to promote private participation and private investment. Now, why do we need PPPs? Can we do without them? Why are we emphasizing them? As the expert committee has brought out, what we need in terms of investment in urban infrastructure is truly enormous. There's not a ghost of a chance of the government ever being able to mobilize even a fraction of that. So we are talking of sharing of revenues, devolution, etc., and rightly so. That will certainly increase the pool of resources available with the local bodies, and that's the need of the hour. But that will still fall short of any worthwhile investment program that is badly needed to upgrade urban services. How do we get the money? As Mr. Smoke rightly pointed out, if you impose more taxes, people are not willing to pay them unless it is demonstrated to them that they are going to get a good service, affordable service in return. So merely by raising taxes and passing them on, I don't think we will succeed, because you will face a lot of resistance and you will not succeed in raising those taxes. On the other hand, if you get private participation, there is an argument about delivery of services at competitive prices and at high levels of efficiency and at comparatively lower costs. When that happens, most rational users, and I think most users are rational, they get persuaded to share the costs. For example, we are tolling millions and millions of vehicles every day on PPP roads, and there isn't any significant resistance to payment of tolls. There are problems here and there, but as a whole, we have about 500 projects collecting toll revenues, user charges. They are being paid, and several roads have been built, and more than 1 lakh crore rupees, that is more than 20 billion US dollars, have been invested through PPP in just roads. This experiment has, and this has happened in various other infrastructure sectors, and I can give you a whole list of them. But this has somehow not taken root. It has not been introduced at all in the urban infrastructure sector. One of the rare examples is, as Mr. Mohanty knows, he is the Chief Secretary in Andhra, is the Hyderabad Metro Rail project. It also happens to be the largest PPP project in India, something close to about 2.5 to 3 billion US dollars. That's the scale of investment. It is running into some rough weather because of the turmoil arising out of the division of bifurcation of the state, but otherwise its construction is proceeding very well, and it's a fully financed project. But unfortunately, that example has not been replicated anywhere else. And there is a great deal of resistance in adoption of the PPP approach. And that's not uncommon. Our experience suggests in sector after sector that the incumbent functionaries, be they political or bureaucratic or technocratic, they do not like the challenge posed by PPPs. They do not want to cede territory to PPP operators. They do not want to give up the control over lucrative contracts. They do not want to cede their authority over project assets. Therefore, PPPs do not move ahead. They only begin to happen when there is user demand, there is political pressure, there is need to respond to the voters that some services are necessary and they are being provided. And since we don't have the money, we are going to use PPP. That's how PPPs get introduced. So as and when the scenario becomes tougher and tougher in urban infrastructure services, I presume there will be greater demand in introduction of PPPs. Now, it is be it metro rail, be it urban water supply, sewage treatment plants, whole lot of things which are in the urban domain. Water supply is a big area where lots of investment